Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's version of AACRAO's Credential Chats. We are really excited this week to be joined by Keisha Campbell, University Registrar and Executive Director of Enrollment Management at Morgan State University. Keisha, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And Keisha, I was just so glad we got to connect at the Digital Credentials Summit a few weeks ago in New Orleans. You were one of the handful of ACRAO members there who was kind of bringing that lens and that perspective to a pretty large gathering dedicated to the stuff that this community is interested in. So we had an opportunity to talk to Melanie Golub, the executive director of ACRAO, while we were there. We last week had on Mark McConaughey, and so was just really grateful that you were willing to take the time to join us this week to kind of share some of your takeaways, from that sort of ACRAO, registrar and enrollment management lens of what you were hearing, what you were seeing, and really, putting a pin on and at this conference.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate it. It was great meeting you. Kind of randomly, then we were like, "Oh, wait, you're you. I love this. It's great." So, it was really awesome. That was my second time that One Ed Tech. I was there in Anaheim last year, where I did a just like a chat with Keith Look from Territorium, and we kind of talked about the role of the registrar in micro credentials, and it's kind of just grown and grown and grown. For me, I think it was really nice to see all of the different areas coming together, right? Of course, there were a few people from higher ed there. There were loads of people from different sectors, and just kind of hearing how everybody is using micro-credentialing or thinking about using micro-credentialing in their different areas. So that was really, really nice and kind of enlightening, right? The panel that I was on had folks from all over doing all kinds of different things. Just seeing what the power behind this could really be was really, really nice. And of course, just making connections.
And I want to kind of do a follow-up question there. You talk about these different stakeholders who are showing up, and want to just sort of pick your brain around, where your mind is right now with learning records, and serving different kind of use cases and users than maybe we're used to.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to just be real about where we are in higher education, right? I think I went to Mark and Mike's session where they were just talking about, right, the transcript that we know today is the same transcript from what, like 1870 something, like from the late 1800s, right? It really hasn't changed that sort of A, B, C, D, F, pass, fail. But it's not a full storyteller of your experience, right? So we have all kinds of things that we do during our learning time at university or at work that really isn't demonstrated anywhere. So this, I think, gives an opportunity for people to say, hey, I did this thing, I learned this skill, and here's a verifiable way for you to know that I have this particular skill and someone's certifying that they've, my aptitude at whatever. And I think we have to just be real about what people are looking for, right? We've seen some shifts in hiring trends where people are looking more for skills based, not saying that they're no longer looking for a degree, but they really want to see something that says, hey, Keisha or Noah had this experience outside of here. And I think this just really helps you to tell a more broad story about your experience.
I definitely want to ask you about that. And I also first want to ask you, it sounded to me like you also are interested in expanding our notion of who our earners are, and that the registrar still has a role in that. Could you shed a little light on just where your thinking is with that?
Absolutely. So, as I kind of came into the fold at Morgan and talking about this, I was like, well, why aren't we using this for everybody? If the idea is that this is an institution of higher learning, right? Everybody here is technically a lifelong learner, which means that if you have a faculty institute where faculty are able to have certain types of experiences, maybe they're learning more administrative pieces so that they could potentially become a chair, or as they go through their ascendancy, just kind of making sure that you're keeping track of what are the elements and things that they're doing there. For staff members, right? Maybe you did a management training that allowed you to do conflict negotiation and management. I say that because that's what my degree is in. Right. But maybe you had to go through that. And I actually did have to do like a management series before I became a manager at one of my very first jobs. And those are skills that I still use today, right? So we all know that we've seen people who've been elevated through different pieces. what are the training and the skills that you've had to do to be able to get there? So I think there are just lots of ways where you could use it for staff members, you could use it for faculty members, you could use it for students as well, and make sure that this is something that is for the entire campus community because everybody there is supposed to be a learner.
And that just gets me thinking, even our own offices, where there might be opportunities within an office of the registrar, for example, to notice, name, and credential things that align with AACRAO's core competencies, for example. At
Yep.
the same time, some that we may have some folks in our community who are thinking, well, isn't this kind of an HR thing? Isn't that their responsibility to be documenting this? And as the registrar, executive director, enrollment management, we're saying, where do you feel your role is as the registrar as we think of these things in the, overarching umbrella of learning records?
I mean, the registrar is a record keeper, right? That's one of the core things that the registrar's office does, and you there's a level of trust that comes with something coming from the office of the registrar. It should be a partnership. You can work with HR to do this. You can work with your academic affairs office or whatever to kind of make sure that this is there. But what you don't want to happen, and this was an example we had in one of the sessions, is maybe you have a program and somebody does this program off on their own. And then 15 years later, this person comes back and says, oh, I got a certificate from, and you're like, what are you talking about? I don't, I've never heard about that before, right? So if even if it's that you're just helping to kind of like determine how do you keep this credential in place, how does somebody come back and get that if they need it? With digital wallets, you kind of get to take your credential with you, so that's kind of cool. But I think it adds to just the veracity of the document. People can feel like it's verified, that it's a legitimate document, right? Or it's a legitimate credential that you have. So I don't see why the registrar wouldn't necessarily be involved in that. I don't see it as a negative. I see it as a plus.
Yeah, and hopefully a place for us to leverage the expertise out of our offices that, if we're not at the table, other people are going to miss the mark because they're not going to know the questions to ask. They're not going to know the compliance concerns and things like that is just kind of expertise unique to our offices.
Precisely. No, you just said it perfectly. That's exactly it, right? What are the questions that you're asking about it? What are the different standards that are behind this, right? Even within your schools and your colleges, you have little nuances, right, that might be important to your accreditation agency, that this piece of information is there. So I think it's important that we have the registrar at the table when you talk about this kind of stuff.
Mm. And earlier you said two things. You used the word narrative, which I
Mhm.
think is kind of interesting because I don't know that necessarily when people talk about the transcript that it's historically, for over 100 years been something that people think of as a narrative of our learning achievement. And I do hear you talking about these innovative learning records and digital credentials in a way that gets at narrative and storytelling. And you also talked about taking it with you, which means you're probably showing it to new people. And it's not just an audience of, I shouldn't say just, it's not an exclusively an audience of admissions and registrar stakeholders. And so, could you just share sort of where you're thinking of is on a, who is the audience, for digital credentials from, that you see in the future at Morgan State, for example?
Well, I mean, just as I mentioned at the panel that I was on, look at all the folks that were on that panel with me that were using it in different ways, right? The Young People's Project that spoke to us after our original panel, where they were talking about it for math literacy and all of the different things that they were able to utilize with the students in there. You're talking about employers being able to look and see what are the competencies that you may have gotten while doing your program, right? You may still have your degree, but there's some other elements to your program that just are not going to show up on your transcript that you may have experienced while you were there. When you think about participating in student organizations and participating in student government, maybe Greek life, there's some elements to that that might be talking to your ability to organize or lead or to be part of a group or whatever the case might be that doesn't necessarily come across in an ABCDF transcript, right? Maybe you did study abroad, but what you did in that study abroad was service learning, right? Your transcript doesn't say that. It says you got an A, right? It doesn't tell you what all the things are that you did while you were there. So I think, again, just looking at that, an employer might find that really, really interesting to learn about what you did while you studied abroad. And I'm going to say Germany because that's where I went to college. But what does that look like for you when you go back to do employment, or if you're trying to look for a pathway within your job to say, okay, here's some other things I want to be able to do, and here's what I have to back up to say that I'm able to do that. I just feel like there's a lot of ways that you could utilize this. You're gonna need other industries to sort of think about how that translates for them, right? Because if you're just issuing a credential that doesn't mean anything to anybody, that's not helpful. So as we were talking about on the panel, like what are employers looking for? What do they want to see when you're thinking about people that may have been incarcerated and did some job training or other things that might make them be able to assimilate back into society as they come out? One of the folks on the panel said they're getting like food service training while they're in, and they get their certification. So when they come out and are looking for a job, they have that thing already that says, hey, I got certified to do this particular thing. Maybe I'm able to get a job faster than somebody else who doesn't have that particular item. So I just feel like there's just like a wide range of ways. We have a lot of way to go to get there to determine what all those things are, but there are lots of use cases that are showing where this really has worked out and helped people as they move along. So we just need to be really thoughtful and intentional about how we move forward with it.
Well, and listening to you, it sounds like your thinking on this has really evolved, especially with that audience piece of, historically trusted, verifiable learning records from a, institution of higher education. When it's going to an employer, it's probably primarily been used for more of a like verification or a weed out case, right? It's a pitchfork to, we know that, yes, okay, they do or do not have this required um credential in order to, even be considered. And I hear you going to a place that's just so far beyond that, where we're packaging in these in a way that employers aren't just using them to sort of vet people to make sure, if what they don't know, and get people use a pitchfork to get that hay out of the way, but to actually magnetize needles to help people get found
Yep.
because of the narratives that are in the learning records.
Yep. That's exactly it, right? And isn't that what you want though? Right? Don't you want to draw people to apply to that job or apply to that position or that posting or whatever that have those skills already there? If you can see that outright and then they say, oh my gosh, I have that thing and I can show that I have that thing. Um, why is that? That's like a good thing to me. So I think there's just so many ways to kind of think about how, again, this allows you to tell your story in a very clean and sometimes verifiable way. And also, like, some of us are not good at demonstrating sort of what our skills are, right? So you could get into this particular space and may not be as good at telling your story as a document might be able to tell your story. But again, a transcript is kind of singular, right? So if you and I were in the same program, and I got a degree and you got a degree in the same program, but you had a 3.9 and I had a 2.1, right? Are we on the same playing field? But maybe maybe I studied abroad. Maybe I did 10 or 12 other things and you studied and you were in your books and that was your thing. There are nuances there to that. So, right, like it's not to say that one person's less than or more than, but it allows you to kind of give some credence to some of the other experiences that you might have had in a meaningful way. That's kind of the way that I see it.
I just really love your focus on the storytelling piece there, that this is really focused on our learners and equipping them with learning records that, don't just help them prove that they attended and got certain grades, but actually showcase, amplify, to shine big, bright lights on the awesomeness of their learning achievement while they're with us. And also, I guess one thing that I do want to clarify is it sounds like you're all about, these amplified, more 360 high def rich narrative learning records, and you're about the transcript. You don't see these things as being a threat to or in competition with the transcript.
Absolutely not. I don't I think the 360 works, right? How many of us have had that sort of the evaluation, your workplace evaluation that doesn't really kind of tell the whole story of what it is. It's just sort of one pathway, right? Uh, I think that there's no harm in enhancing what you already have, right? We know that the academic transcript does what it does, right? But there's no harm in enhancing that and allowing people to have another element to that. There's just so much that could be added to it and make it more rich. I don't think it's a competition. I don't think it replaces your academic transcript. It only serves to enhance what you've already done there.
Keisha Campbell, I am just getting goosebumps over here listening to you. Thank you so much for joining us this week on Credential Chats, and hopefully we will get to see you at the ACRA annual meeting in April.
I will be there for sure.
Thanks so much. Have a great rest.